I will not sit next to her. Move this woman to economy where she belongs, or I'm getting off this plane right now.
The words sliced through the first-class cabin of Horizon Air Flight 402 like a blade sharp and unforgiving. Victoria Blackwood's manicured finger pointed directly at the quiet woman in seat 1. Her voice dripping with entitled disgust that made every passenger within earshot freeze mid-conversation. The woman in question didn't look up from her worn, paperback novel. She simply turned the page with deliberate calm, her wire-rimmed glasses catching the cabin's soft lighting. Her navy cardigan was modest, her gray slacks unremarkable, and her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. To Victoria Blackwood, she looked exactly like what she expected to see in economy class, not occupying the premium seat directly beside her own. But what Victoria didn't know, what none of the 47 passengers and crew aboard that Boeing 777 could have imagined, was that in exactly 12 minutes, the quiet woman in seat 1A would reveal a truth so shocking it would destroy Victoria's life, completely transform an entire industry, and create a viral moment that would be watched by over 15 million people worldwide. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Stories like this need to be heard. Now let's rewind to how this moment began. Thursday afternoon at JFK International Airport had been nothing short of chaos. Storm clouds hung low over Queens, turning the sky an ominous shade of gray that seemed to mirror the mood inside Terminal 4. Flight delays stretched across every departure board, and passenger patience wore thin with each passing announcement. Victoria Blackwood stood at Gate 47, her $8,000 Hermes coat draped over her arm like a badge of superiority. At 52, she possessed the kind of artificial elegance that money could buy, but character could never sustain. Her platinum blonde hair was styled to perfection, her makeup applied with surgical precision, and her diamond Cartier watch caught the fluorescent lighting every time she checked it, which she did obsessively. She had been checking that watch for the past 15 minutes, and her irritation was reaching a boiling point. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she muttered to no one in particular, her voice carrying across the gate area with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. A young mother sitting nearby with her toddler shifted uncomfortably, instinctively pulling her child closer. Victoria was the widow of Robert Blackwood, a Manhattan real estate mogul whose death 2 years prior had left her with a $47 million estate, 3 luxury properties, and a complete inability to understand that money couldn't purchase basic human decency. She lived in a world where problems disappeared with the snap of her fingers, where household staff were fired for making eye contact, and where anyone who didn't meet her standards of appearance or status was simply invisible. Today's destination was London, where she would attend the annual Children's Future Foundation Gala, an exclusive charity event that raised money for disadvantaged youth. The irony of Victoria Blackwood attending an event dedicated to helping underserved children while simultaneously treating service workers with contempt would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. She had paid $15,000 for her first-class seat, and she expected every penny's worth of luxury privacy and exclusivity that such a price should command. What she had not expected was a delay. Attention passengers came the announcement that finally pushed Victoria over the edge. "We apologize for the continued delay of Flight 402 to London Heathrow. We are currently experiencing weather-related air traffic control holds. Priority boarding will begin in approximately 8 more minutes. 8 more minutes." Victoria's jaw clenched as she marched toward the desk where David Walsh, a 34-year-old gate agent with 12 years of experience and the patience of a saint, was fielding complaints from increasingly agitated passengers. "This is completely unacceptable," Victoria announced, cutting in front of a businessman who had been waiting his turn. I am Victoria Blackwood, and I have a reservation at Claridge's that cannot be delayed. I demand you find a way to board this aircraft immediately." David looked up from his computer screen with practiced diplomatic calm. "Mrs. Blackwood, I understand your frustration. Unfortunately, the delay is due to air traffic control restrictions that are completely outside our control. As soon as we receive clearance—" "I don't want to hear excuses," Victoria interrupted, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea who I am? My late husband built half the skyline of this city. I have been flying first class for longer than you've been alive, and I will not be treated like some common passenger." Around the gate area, other travelers began to take notice. Some pulled out their phones already, sensing the potential for something worth recording. David maintained his professional composure even as Victoria's entitlement filled the air like a toxic fog. "Ma'am, I assure you that we will begin boarding as soon as possible. Your seat in first class will be waiting for you, and I've made a note in your reservation about the delay to ensure our crew is aware." "Your crew?" Victoria scoffed. "Let me guess, they're probably as incompetent as you are. I swear the quality of service has completely deteriorated. You people simply don't understand what real service means. The phrase 'you people' hung in the air with unmistakable implications." David's professional smile faltered slightly, but years of experience had taught him how to handle difficult passengers without escalating situations. He simply nodded and returned to his computer. "I'll make sure the captain is aware of your concerns, Mrs. Blackwood. Thank you for your patience." Victoria wasn't finished. She stood at the counter for another 5 minutes, making increasingly personal and demeaning comments about David's competence, his appearance, and his ability to do his job. By the time priority boarding was finally called, she had created such a scene that half the gate area was actively avoiding eye contact with her. When the announcement finally came, Victoria didn't wait for David to finish speaking. She pushed past a well-dressed businessman cut in front of an elderly couple and slammed her boarding pass onto the scanner with enough force to make David flinch. "It's about time," she snapped, snatching her pass back. "I'll be reporting this entire experience to your management. This level of incompetence is unacceptable." As she marched down the jet bridge, her heels clicking against the metal floor like gunshots, several passengers exchanged glances. A few shook their heads in disapproval. One woman whispered to her husband, "Can you imagine treating someone like that?" But Victoria Blackwood was already focused on her next source of irritation. She had no idea that her behavior was about to escalate far beyond anything David Walsh had witnessed at his gate counter. She was about to enter a confined space with someone who would challenge every assumption she had ever made about who belonged where. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was designed for luxury and privacy. 12 spacious suites arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each with sliding doors, lie-flat beds, and enough personal space to ensure that even the most demanding passengers could find comfort during the 7-hour flight to London. The lighting was warm and inviting, the seats upholstered in buttery leather, and the atmosphere carefully crafted to suggest exclusivity and refinement. Victoria stepped into this sanctuary and immediately began scanning for her seat. 1B. Window side, just as she had requested. But as her eyes found her suite, they also found something that made her blood pressure spike instantly, sitting in seat 1. Directly adjacent to her own was a black woman. Victoria stopped walking. Her mouth fell open slightly as she stared, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. The woman appeared to be in her early 60s, dressed in a simple navy cardigan over a white blouse and gray slacks. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore wire-rimmed glasses as she read what appeared to be a well-worn paperback book. Her posture was relaxed, her expression serene, and she seemed completely at ease in the luxury surroundings. To Victoria Blackwood, this was all wrong. In her worldview, people who looked like this woman belonged in economy class, or better yet, on different flights entirely. The cognitive dissonance of seeing someone she immediately categorized as the help occupying a seat that cost more than many people's monthly salary sent her into an instant rage. She stood there for a full 30 seconds, waiting for the woman to notice her and perhaps offer some explanation, some apology, some acknowledgement that she was in the wrong place. But the woman simply continued reading, turning a page with unhurried calm. Sophia Martinez appeared at Victoria's side with a tray of pre-departure champagne and the kind of welcoming smile that had earned her commendations during her 8 years as a flight attendant. At 28, Sophia was a single mother supporting her elderly parents while pursuing a degree in hospitality management. She had seen difficult passengers before, but something about the way Victoria was staring at her fellow passenger made her immediately nervous. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Blackwood," Sophia said, offering the champagne with professional warmth. "May I help you get settled?" Victoria ignored the offer completely. Instead, she pointed directly at the woman in seat 1A with the kind of aggressive finger gesture usually reserved for scolding children. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice already rising above the quiet murmur of other passengers boarding behind them. Sophia blinked, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. What exactly is the problem?" "The problem," Victoria said, her voice dripping with indignation, "is that I paid $15,000 for privacy and exclusivity, and instead I'm being seated next to—" She paused, her eyes raking over the quiet woman with open contempt. "To someone who clearly doesn't belong in first class." The woman in seat 1. A finally looked up from her book. Her dark eyes met Victoria's with a calm, steady gaze that revealed nothing. She removed her glasses slowly, folding them into her lap with deliberate precision. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice low and controlled, carrying a subtle authority that Victoria completely missed in her rage. "Yes, there is a problem," Victoria snapped, turning her back on the woman as if she were dismissing a servant. She addressed Sophia directly, her voice getting louder with each word. "I expect to understand how she got that seat. Did she win some sort of lottery? Is she using an employee pass, because she certainly doesn't look like she can afford to be here?" The first-class cabin went completely silent. Other passengers, Tyler Brooks, a tech blogger in his early 30s who had been live-streaming his travel experience, and James Thompson, a renowned architect in his late 50s, stopped what they were doing to listen. The air itself seemed to thicken with tension. Sophia's professional smile cracked slightly. After 8 years in the airline industry, she had developed a sixth sense for situations that were about to explode, and every instinct she possessed was screaming danger. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "that is another passenger who has a valid ticket just like yours. I cannot and will not ask to see her documentation based on your assumptions about her appearance." Victoria's face flushed red. "Assumptions. Look at her." She gestured wildly at the woman who had returned to her book, but was clearly listening to every word. "Does she look like someone who belongs in $15,000 seats? I demand to see her boarding pass. I demand to know how she got that ticket." The woman in seat 1. A. Doctor. Evelyn Carter. Though no one in that cabin knew her true identity yet, closed her book gently and looked up again. This time her gaze held something that might have been amusement, though it was so subtle that Victoria missed it entirely. "My ticket is in order," Evelyn said softly. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Carter, and I assure you I have every right to be here." "I don't care what you call yourself." Victoria spat, her voice now loud enough that passengers in economy could probably hear her. "I care about my comfort. I am a platinum-level passenger. My husband built half the skyline of Manhattan. I will not spend 7 hours sitting next to someone who looks like she should be serving me drinks instead of drinking them herself." The racist implications of her words hung in the air like poison gas. Several passengers gasped audibly. Tyler Brooks, who had initially been filming casual travel content for his 2.1 million followers, quickly switched his phone to record what was clearly becoming a major incident. Sophia took a deep breath, drawing on every bit of professional training she had received. "Mrs. Blackwood, I need to ask you to lower your voice and take your seat. What you're saying is discriminatory and completely inappropriate. Dr. Carter has every right to be here, and I will not ask her to move based on your personal prejudices." Victoria's eyes widened with shock and rage. "Prejudices? How dare you? I am simply demanding the level of service I paid for. I want her moved to economy class where she belongs, or I want someone else upgraded to replace her. I don't care how you solve this problem, but you will solve it, or I'll have your job." Dr. Evelyn Carter set her book down on the tray table and looked directly at Victoria for the first time since the confrontation began. Her expression remained perfectly calm, but there was something in her dark eyes that suggested layers of experience, wisdom, and perhaps most importantly, patience. "You really should take your seat," Evelyn said quietly. "We have a schedule to keep." "Don't you dare speak to me," Victoria shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "I want the captain. Get me the captain right now." And that was the moment when everything changed. Because from the cockpit of Flight 402, behind a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," came the sound of footsteps. The door handle turned and Captain Marcus Rodriguez stepped into the first-class cabin. At 45, Marcus was a man who carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from 22 years of flying experience and an impeccable safety record. He had worked his way up from regional airlines to major carriers, and just 6 months ago, he had achieved his dream of becoming a senior captain with Horizon Air. He was the primary breadwinner for his family, his wife Isabella and their 2 daughters, Sophia, 16, and Maria, 12. Their mortgage, the girls' college funds, their entire future depended on his ability to handle situations like this with professionalism and diplomacy. "What seems to be the problem here?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect in difficult situations. Victoria lunged at him verbally before he had even fully emerged from the cockpit. "Captain! Thank God! Your crew is completely incompetent. This woman," she pointed at Evelyn with renewed venom, "is in my space. She doesn't belong in first class, and I demand that she be removed immediately. I am Victoria Blackwood. I am sure you've heard of the Blackwood real estate empire. I will not tolerate this indignity." Marcus looked at Victoria, taking in her expensive clothes, her aggressive posture, and her obvious agitation. Then his gaze shifted to seat 1A, where a quiet, dignified woman sat reading a book. Dr. Evelyn Carter looked up at him, and their eyes met directly. In that moment, Captain Marcus Rodriguez froze completely. His hand, which had been reaching for his radio, stopped in midair. His eyes widened, not with annoyance or confusion, but with sudden, jarring shock. The color drained from his face so completely that it looked like he might faint. He stared at Evelyn Carter, his mouth opening and closing silently like a man who had just seen a ghost. Because Marcus Rodriguez, senior captain for Horizon Air, had just realized he was looking at Dr. Evelyn Carter, the founder and CEO of Meridian Airways, the company that owned 67% of Horizon Air. He was looking at his ultimate boss, the woman who had revolutionized the airline industry with her commitment to employee dignity and passenger equality, and she was being discriminated against on his aircraft. Evelyn gave him the smallest, most imperceptible nod. A gesture so subtle that Victoria missed it entirely, but which conveyed volumes to the captain, who suddenly understood the gravity of what was happening in his cabin. Victoria, completely oblivious to the silent communication that had just taken place, smirked with satisfaction. "See," she said triumphantly, "even the captain agrees. She doesn't belong here." But Captain Rodriguez wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at Dr. Evelyn Carter with an expression that mixed profound respect, growing horror at what he was witnessing, and the dawning realization that he was about to witness something that would change everything. "Dr. Carter," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Captain Rodriguez," Evelyn replied smoothly, her voice carrying just enough authority to make it clear that she knew exactly who he was as well. "It's been quite an enlightening flight so far." Victoria looked between the pilot and the woman in seat 1A, her confusion quickly curdling into suspicion. She didn't like being ignored, and she certainly didn't like the fact that this conversation seemed to be happening without her. But she had no idea that in the next few minutes her entire world was about to collapse. She had no idea that the quiet woman she was demanding be moved to economy class was about to reveal an identity so shocking that it would not only destroy Victoria's life but transform an entire industry. The countdown had begun. In exactly 9 minutes, Victoria Blackwood would learn the most expensive lesson of her life. And every passenger on Flight 402 was about to witness justice served at 35,000 feet. The woman sitting so calmly in seat 1A as Victoria Blackwood hurled racist insults at her was not who anyone in that cabin imagined her to be. Dr. Evelyn Carter was worth $3.2 billion. She was the founder and CEO of Meridian Airways, one of the largest privately held airline companies in the world, with 847 aircraft flying to 312 destinations across 6 continents. Meridian Airways owned a controlling 67% stake in Horizon Air, the very airline on which this confrontation was taking place. In the aviation industry, Evelyn Carter was a legend, a pioneer who had built an empire from nothing while revolutionizing how airlines treated both passengers and employees. But as she sat in her modest navy cardigan, reading a worn paperback copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God, no one could have guessed that the quiet, unassuming woman being subjected to Victoria's racist tirade controlled the aircraft they were sitting in. Evelyn had been born in rural Alabama in 1962, the daughter of sharecroppers who worked land they would never own. Her father, James Carter, had worked 18-hour days in cotton fields under the blazing southern sun, while her mother Ruth cleaned houses for white families who never bothered to learn her name. Evelyn grew up in a 2-room shack with no running water, no electricity, and no reason to believe that her life would be any different from her parents. But Evelyn Carter had always been different. While other children played in the dusty yard after school, she sat under a massive oak tree with books borrowed from the county's segregated library. She read everything she could get her hands on: mathematics, science, literature, history. By the age of 12, she was teaching herself calculus from textbooks that other students wouldn't encounter until college. Her teachers recognized her extraordinary intellect early, but in 1970s, rural Alabama, being a brilliant black girl from a sharecropper family, presented challenges that seemed insurmountable. College was an impossible dream for someone whose family could barely afford food, let alone tuition. Everything changed when Evelyn was 17. A guidance counselor named Margaret Foster, a white woman who had moved to Alabama from Vermont to teach in underserved communities, recognized Evelyn's potential and refused to let it go to waste. Mrs. Foster spent her own money to help Evelyn apply to colleges, wrote recommendation letters, and drove her 3 hours to Atlanta for interviews. Evelyn received a full scholarship to Georgia Institute of Technology, where she majored in aerospace engineering. She was one of only 3 black students in her program and the only black woman. Her classmates alternated between ignoring her completely and questioning whether she belonged there. Professors called her by other students' names. Study groups excluded her. She faced the same assumptions about her intelligence and capabilities that Victoria Blackwood was displaying in the aircraft cabin above. But Evelyn persevered. She graduated summa cum laude, earned a master's degree, and then a Ph.D. from MIT, specializing in aircraft design and aviation operations management. By the time she was 30, she had worked for Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Delta Airlines, consistently rising through the ranks despite facing discrimination at every level. In 1995, at the age of 33, Evelyn made a decision that would change her life and eventually transform an entire industry. Using her savings and a loan secured against her small apartment, she purchased a single used cargo aircraft and started Meridian Airways. Her first flight was a cargo run from Atlanta to Memphis, carrying medical supplies. She flew the plane herself, handled the paperwork personally, and slept on the floor of a freight hangar because she couldn't afford a hotel. But she had a vision that went far beyond that single aircraft. Evelyn believed that airlines could be profitable while treating people with dignity. She believed that employees who felt valued and respected would provide better service. She believed that passengers, regardless of their appearance, background, or economic status, deserved to be treated as human beings rather than cargo. These beliefs guided every decision as Meridian Airways grew. When other airlines were cutting staff and reducing services, Evelyn invested in training programs that taught employees to recognize and prevent discrimination. When competitors focused solely on maximizing revenue per seat, Meridian created policies ensuring that passenger comfort and dignity were never compromised for profit. By 2010, Meridian Airways was operating 200 aircraft. By 2018, they had acquired significant stakes in 12 other airlines, including the 67% controlling interest in Horizon Air that they had purchased just 2 years ago. Evelyn had built a transportation empire worth over $8 billion while maintaining her commitment to treating every passenger and employee with respect. But success hadn't eliminated the discrimination she faced. Even as one of the most powerful executives in aviation, Evelyn regularly encountered people who made assumptions about her capabilities based on her appearance. She had been mistaken for a flight attendant at industry conferences, questioned about her qualifications by investors, and subjected to the kind of subtle and overt racism that successful black women navigated daily. That's why for the past 3 months, Dr. Evelyn Carter had been conducting undercover investigations of her own airlines. It had started with a series of anonymous complaints submitted through Meridian's employee reporting structure. Flight attendants, gate agents, and even some pilots had been documenting incidents of passenger discrimination that seemed to be occurring disproportionately on certain routes. The complaints were specific and disturbing black passengers being questioned about their ticket validity, Hispanic families being moved away from white passengers, Asian business travelers being subjected to additional security screenings. Most concerning were the reports coming from Horizon Air Flight 402, the New York to London route that Victoria Blackwood was now traveling. According to multiple anonymous reports, this particular flight had become a magnet for entitled passengers who felt comfortable expressing racist views toward fellow travelers. Rather than conducting a traditional corporate investigation, Evelyn had decided to see the truth for herself. For 3 months, she had been booking flights under her real name, but dressing down, traveling without the usual markers of wealth and status that might influence how she was treated. She wanted to experience her airlines the way ordinary passengers did. This flight was supposed to be her final undercover investigation. She had booked seat 1A deliberately knowing that first-class cabins were where entitled passengers often felt most comfortable expressing their prejudices. She had dressed modestly, chosen a well-worn paperback book, and settled in to observe. She hadn't expected to become the target herself. As Victoria continued her racist tirade demanding that Captain Rodriguez remove her from first class, Evelyn remained outwardly calm. But internally, she was documenting every word, every gesture, every moment of discrimination that was unfolding. This incident would become a case study, a training tool, and potentially a legal matter that would send shockwaves through the industry. She was also calculating the consequences. Victoria Blackwood was about to learn that actions have repercussions, that treating people with contempt based on their appearance could destroy everything you thought you owned. Meanwhile, Victoria herself was completely oblivious to the magnitude of her mistake. Victoria Blackwood had lived her entire adult life insulated from consequences. Born Victoria Ashworth to a middle-class family in New Jersey, she had married Robert Blackwood when she was 23, and he was 45, trading her youth and beauty for access to wealth and social status. Robert had been a real estate developer who specialized in luxury properties, and his success had provided Victoria with everything money could buy: designer clothes, exclusive vacations, membership in elite social clubs, and, most importantly, the power to treat other people as disposable. For 27 years of marriage, Victoria had never worked a day in her life. She had spent her time shopping, attending charity galas where she was photographed for society magazines, and cultivating friendships with other wealthy wives who shared her sense of superiority over anyone they considered beneath them. When Robert died of a heart attack 2 years ago, Victoria inherited everything: the $18 million Manhattan penthouse, the $12 million Hamptons estate, the art collection, the stock portfolio, and, most crucially, the belief that her wealth made her better than other people. Since Robert's death, Victoria had become increasingly isolated and bitter. Without her husband's business connections to ground her, her sense of entitlement had grown unchecked. She had fired 23 household employees in 2 years for various infractions, making eye contact, speaking without being spoken to, suggesting that her treatment of them was inappropriate. Her social circle had begun to shrink as well. Other wealthy wives found her behavior embarrassing, her racism too overt for even their elevated social circles. Charity organizations had started declining her offers to host events after incidents where she had made inappropriate comments about the people they were supposedly helping. Victoria's trip to London was partially an attempt to rehabilitate her social standing. The Children's Future Foundation Gala was an exclusive event that attracted European royalty, tech billionaires, and entertainment celebrities. Being photographed at such an event would reinforce her status and hopefully help her regain some of the social influence she felt slipping away. She had spent $15,000 on the first-class ticket specifically because she wanted to travel in an environment where she would be surrounded by the right kind of people, wealthy, white, and willing to share her assumptions about who belonged where. The presence of Dr. Evelyn Carter in Seat 1. A represented everything Victoria feared about the changing world around her. In her mind, people like Evelyn were supposed to know their place, and that place was not in first-class cabins, luxury hotels, or exclusive charity galas. What Victoria didn't realize was that people like Evelyn Carter had never known their place because their place was wherever they decided it should be. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood frozen in the aisle, trapped between his professional obligations and his growing horror at what he was witnessing. As Victoria continued her demands for Evelyn's removal, Marcus found himself in an impossible position. On one hand, he had been trained to handle difficult passengers diplomatically. Customer service was a crucial part of airline operations, and keeping passengers happy, especially high-paying first-class passengers, was considered essential for business success. On the other hand, he was watching his ultimate boss being subjected to racist abuse, and every word of it was being recorded by other passengers. Marcus had worked for Horizon Air for 3 years, ever since Meridian Airways had acquired their controlling stake. The takeover had been remarkably smooth, with Meridian's leadership emphasizing that they valued Horizon's existing crew and would be investing in better training, improved working conditions, and enhanced passenger services. During the transition, all Horizon Air employees had attended seminars about Meridian's corporate values. The message had been clear: discrimination of any kind was unacceptable. Employees were empowered to protect passengers from abuse, and the company would always support crew members who stood up for what was right. But Marcus had never met Dr. Evelyn Carter personally. He knew the name, of course. Every airline employee knew the story of the sharecropper's daughter who had built an aviation empire. But he had never seen her photograph, never attended a company meeting where she spoke, never imagined he would encounter her as a passenger on his flight. Now, as he looked at the quiet woman in Seat 1, Marcus realized he was witnessing a test. not just of his character, but of everything Meridian Airways claimed to stand for. His wife Isabella worked as a nurse at Queen's Hospital, often dealing with patients who made racist comments about her Hispanic heritage. His daughters Sophia and Maria attended a diverse high school, where they were learning to navigate a world that still judged people by their appearance rather than their character. Marcus knew what was right. The question was whether he had the courage to do it, even if it meant confronting a wealthy passenger who could potentially damage his career. As Victoria's voice grew louder and her demands more insistent, Marcus realized that his career might already be in jeopardy. If Dr. Evelyn Carter chose to report this incident, and why wouldn't she, his failure to act decisively could be seen as complicity in discrimination. The other passengers in first class were all watching, now their phones out, their attention focused entirely on the confrontation unfolding in row 1. Tyler Brooks, the tech blogger, had already switched his live stream to focus on the incident, and his viewer count was climbing rapidly as word spread across social media. Sophia Martinez, the flight attendant, stood nearby with growing anxiety. She had done everything right according to her training. She had refused Victoria's discriminatory demands, explained company policy, and attempted to defuse the situation professionally. But Victoria's behavior was escalating, and Sophia knew that without support from the captain, her efforts to protect Dr. Carter would be futile. James Thompson, the architect in seat 3B, had begun discreetly recording audio on his phone. As someone who had witnessed discrimination in professional settings, he recognized the importance of documentation. He also recognized that this incident was going to have consequences far beyond the aircraft cabin. Dr. Evelyn Carter continued to sit calmly, but her sharp mind was processing every element of the situation. She was observing not just Victoria's behavior, but the responses of the crew, the other passengers, and the spreading social media attention. In her years of building Meridian Airways, Evelyn had learned that moments of crisis often became opportunities for transformation. This incident could become a teaching tool, a catalyst for industry-wide change, and a demonstration that discrimination had consequences even for wealthy passengers who thought their money protected them from accountability. But first, Victoria Blackwood needed to learn who she was really talking to. As Victoria's demands reached a crescendo and Captain Rodriguez struggled to find the right words, Dr. Evelyn Carter made a decision. It was time to remove all doubt. Victoria Blackwood had worked herself into a frenzy of righteous indignation, and Captain Rodriguez's obvious discomfort only fueled her conviction that she was in the right. "Captain, I can see that you understand the situation," Victoria announced, interpreting Marcus's stunned silence as agreement with her position. "This woman clearly doesn't belong in first class. I don't know how she managed to get that seat, but I'm sure if you check her documentation, you'll find some sort of irregularity." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was staring at Dr. Evelyn Carter, the woman who had revolutionized his industry, the CEO, whose policies had improved working conditions for thousands of airline employees, and he was watching her being subjected to the kind of discrimination that Meridian Airways had spent billions of dollars trying to eliminate. "I don't have all day." Victoria continued, her voice rising to a near shout. "I have a reservation at Claridge's, and I will not spend this flight sitting next to someone who won a lottery ticket or used food stamps to pay for first class. Move her now, or I'm calling the airline's headquarters myself." Dr. Evelyn Carter looked up from her book for the first time since Captain Rodriguez had entered the cabin. Her dark eyes met his with a gaze that conveyed both understanding of his position and quiet expectation that he would do the right thing. "Captain Rodriguez," she said softly, "perhaps you should handle this situation according to company policy." The mention of company policy sent a jolt through Marcus. He knew exactly what Meridian Airways policy stated about discrimination. He had read it, been trained on it, and sworn to uphold it. But he also knew that standing up to wealthy passengers could have career consequences, especially if they followed through on threats to complain to corporate headquarters. Victoria noticed the exchange between the captain and Evelyn, and her paranoia began to spike. "What is this?" she demanded, looking between them suspiciously. "Are you two working together, Captain? I'm warning you, if this is some sort of setup, some kind of diversity publicity stunt, I'll have both your jobs. I know people. I have connections. I can destroy your careers with one phone call." Tyler Brooks, who had been live streaming the entire incident, watched his viewer count surge past 50,000 as Victoria's threats became more aggressive. His audience was responding with a mixture of outrage and anticipation, flooding the comments with demands for justice and predictions about what would happen next. "This is absolutely insane," Tyler narrated quietly to his phone. "We're watching a wealthy passenger threaten a black woman and the flight captain because she doesn't think the woman deserves to sit in first class. The entitlement is just unbelievable." Victoria heard Tyler speaking and spun around to face him, her face red with fury. "You," she shouted, pointing at Tyler's phone. "Stop recording this instant. This is a private conversation and you have no right to film me without permission." Tyler looked at her calmly. "Actually, we're in a public space and I have every right to document what's happening here, especially since what's happening is discrimination, which is illegal." "Discrimination?" Victoria shrieked. "I am the victim here. I paid $15,000 for privacy and first-class service, and instead I'm being harassed by people who don't understand their place." The phrase, "their place," sent a chill through the cabin. Even passengers who had been trying to avoid involvement in the confrontation began pulling out their phones. Victoria's mask of polite society had completely slipped away, revealing the raw racism that lay beneath her expensive clothes and cultivated accent. Sophia Martinez stepped forward, her professional training warring with her personal convictions. She had been raised by parents who had immigrated from Mexico and worked double shifts to provide their children with opportunities they had never had. She knew what discrimination looked like, and she refused to stand by while it happened on her aircraft. Mrs. Blackwood. Sophia said firmly, "I need you to stop this behavior immediately. You are disrupting the flight, threatening passengers and crew, and making racist statements that violate federal regulations. If you continue, I will have no choice but to remove you from this aircraft." Victoria's eyes widened with shock. In her world, service workers did not speak to her that way. They certainly did not threaten her or suggest that her behavior was inappropriate. "How dare you!" Victoria screamed loud enough that passengers in economy class could hear her clearly. "I will have you fired before this plane lands. Do you have any idea who I am? My husband built half of Manhattan. I have more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. You are nothing but a waitress with wings, and you will treat me with the respect I deserve." The racist and classist implications of Victoria's words hung in the air like poison. She had revealed everything about her character in a single outburst: her belief that wealth made her superior, her view of service workers as subhuman, and her conviction that money could protect her from consequences. Dr. Evelyn Carter had heard enough. She closed her book gently and placed it on the tray table. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully. Then she looked directly at Victoria Blackwood with the kind of steady gaze that had intimidated corporate executives and government officials across 6 continents. Mrs. Blackwood Evelyn said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made everyone in the cabin stop talking and listen. "I think there's something you should know." Victoria turned toward Evelyn, her face twisted with contempt. "I don't want to hear anything from you." "Captain, if you don't remove this woman from my sight immediately, I'm getting off this plane and reporting everyone involved to your corporate headquarters. And trust me, I know how to make calls that get people fired." Captain Rodriguez finally found his voice. "Mrs. Blackwood, please lower your voice and return to your seat. You are causing a disturbance that—" "I will not lower my voice," Victoria interrupted. "I will not return to my seat, and I will not be lectured by people who don't understand how the world works. This woman," she pointed at Evelyn with naked hatred, does not belong in first class. She probably stole that ticket or won it in some government lottery or got it through some affirmative action program. I demand proof that she paid for it legitimately. The accusation of theft pushed the situation into new territory. Victoria wasn't just expressing preference or making uncomfortable comments anymore. She was making specific criminal allegations based solely on Evelyn's race. James Thompson, the architect who had been quietly recording audio, decided that documenting this incident had become a civic duty. He switched his phone to video mode and began recording openly, no longer caring whether Victoria noticed. For the record, James announced his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in boardrooms. I am James Thompson, principal architect at Thompson Rodriguez and Associates. I am documenting this incident because I believe we are witnessing criminal harassment based on racial discrimination. Victoria spun toward James, her fury now directed at him. You can document whatever you want. When my lawyers get finished with all of you, you'll understand what real harassment looks like. I'm not the criminal here, she is. Victoria pointed at Evelyn again. She's committing fraud by sitting in that seat. Dr. Evelyn Carter had spent decades building her business empire by maintaining her composure in the face of discrimination, sexism, and classism that would have destroyed less determined people. She had negotiated billion-dollar deals while being underestimated, had transformed an entire industry while being dismissed as unqualified, and had built a company culture based on dignity while constantly having her own dignity challenged. But Victoria Blackwood had just accused her of theft. Evelyn stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, she wasn't imposing physically, but her presence filled the cabin like gathering thunder. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 30 years of building an aviation empire and the quiet power of someone who had never needed to shout to be heard. Mrs. Blackwood, she said, you've made a serious mistake. Victoria laughed, a harsh sound filled with contempt. Mistake. The only mistake here is that you're sitting in a seat meant for people who can actually afford it. But don't worry, sweetheart. Once the captain checks your papers, you'll be moved to the back of the plane where you belong. Tyler Brooks's live stream audience had exploded to over 100,000 viewers, and the comments were moving so fast they were impossible to read. Flight 402. Discrimination was beginning to trend on multiple social media platforms as viewers shared clips and screenshots of Victoria's racist tirade. But none of the passengers recording, none of the thousands of people watching online, none of Victoria's targets could have predicted what was about to happen next. Dr. Evelyn Carter reached into her small handbag and pulled out a black leather portfolio embossed with gold lettering. Victoria squinted at the portfolio, trying to read the lettering. What is that supposed to be? Some sort of fake ID. Evelyn opened the portfolio carefully and turned it toward Victoria, Captain Rodriguez, and the cameras that were now recording from multiple angles. Inside the portfolio was a corporate identification badge, a notarized certificate of corporate authority, and a letter of authorization signed by the board of directors of Meridian Airways. The gold lettering on the portfolio that Victoria had dismissed as fake read, Dr. Evelyn Carter, founder and Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Airways International. Victoria stared at the documents, her brain struggling to process what she was seeing. The corporate ID showed Evelyn's photograph alongside her title and signature. The certificate of authority listed her as the principal shareholder and CEO of Meridian Airways. The board authorization gave her complete operational control over all Meridian subsidiaries, including Horizon Air. The woman Victoria had been demanding be removed from first class was the owner of the airline. Captain Rodriguez's face went completely white as the full implications of what he had been witnessing hit him like a freight train. He had just watched a passenger commit federal crimes by making racist threats against his ultimate boss while demanding her removal from an aircraft she owned. Sophia Martinez gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Tyler Brooks stopped narrating his live stream, too stunned to speak. James Thompson's video recording captured the exact moment when Victoria Blackwood's world began to collapse. Victoria stared at the documents for a full 10 seconds, her mouth opening and closing silently. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. This has to be fake." Dr. Evelyn Carter's response was measured and devastating. "Mrs. Blackwood, my name is Dr. Evelyn Carter. I founded Meridian Airways 28 years ago. We own 67% of Horizon Air, which means I own 67% of this aircraft you're standing in. I own 67% of the seat you've been demanding I be removed from. And as of this moment, you have committed federal crimes by making racist threats, filing false accusations of theft, and disrupting airline operations." The cabin fell into complete silence. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft's air circulation structure seemed to quiet as the magnitude of Victoria's mistake became clear to everyone present. Victoria's expensive makeup could not hide the fact that all color had drained from her face. Her designer outfit suddenly looked like a costume, her aggressive posture deflated like a punctured balloon. I didn't know," Victoria stammered. "How was I supposed to know? You don't look like—" "I don't look like what Mrs. Blackwood," Evelyn asked, her voice carrying decades of patience with people who made assumptions based on appearance. "I don't look like someone who could build an airline. I don't look like someone who could earn 3 college degrees. I don't look like someone who belongs in first class." Tyler Brooks's live stream audience had grown to over 150,000 viewers, and Dr. Evelyn Carter was now trending worldwide as news of the incident spread across social media platforms. But the story was far from over, because Dr. Evelyn Carter was just getting started. Tyler Brooks had been live streaming for nearly 4 years, building an audience of 2.1 million followers who tuned in for his travel adventures, tech reviews, and occasional social justice commentary. But he had never captured anything like what was unfolding in front of him. "Guys," he whispered into his phone, his voice filled with awe. "I don't think you understand what we just witnessed. This woman, Victoria Blackwood, just spent 20 minutes screaming racist abuse at a black passenger, demanding she be removed from first class, accusing her of theft, and threatening to have the crew fired." He paused, shaking his head in disbelief. "And that passenger is Dr. Evelyn Carter, the CEO and founder of Meridian Airways. She owns this airline." The live stream chat was moving so fast that individual comments were impossible to read. But the general sentiment was clear. Viewers were demanding justice, sharing the stream with friends, and expressing outrage at Victoria's behavior. Tyler's follower count was climbing in real time as word spread across social media. The racist passenger didn't just pick on the wrong person. Tyler continued, keeping his voice low out of respect for the drama still unfolding. She picked on the person who literally owns the plane she's sitting in. And everything she said, every racist comment, every threat, every accusation, all of it was recorded by multiple passengers and is now going viral worldwide. Tyler wasn't the only one documenting the incident. James Thompson had been recording high-quality video from his seat, capturing not just Victoria's racist tirade, but also the reactions of other passengers and crew members. His architectural training had taught him the importance of documentation, and his professional experience had shown him how crucial evidence could be in discrimination cases. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a civil rights attorney who happened to be traveling in seat 2C, had been discreetly recording audio on her phone since Victoria's first racist outburst. As someone who specialized in discrimination law, Sarah recognized the legal significance of what was happening and understood the importance of preserving evidence. Even passengers in economy class had begun recording once Victoria's shouting became loud enough to be heard throughout the aircraft. Maria Gonzalez, a high school teacher from Queens, had started filming after hearing Victoria's threats against the crew. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we're trying to teach our students is unacceptable," she told her video diary. And seeing it happen to airline employees who are just trying to do their jobs is heartbreaking. But the documentation extended far beyond passenger recordings. Sophia Martinez had been following Meridian Airways protocol by discreetly recording the incident on her company-issued device. Every major airline had implemented recording procedures for discrimination incidents after a series of high-profile lawsuits, and Sophia's training had prepared her for exactly this situation. The aircraft itself was capturing everything as well. Horizon Air Flight 402 was equipped with multiple security cameras that recorded continuously throughout all flights. The audio and video from those cameras would be automatically archived and made available to investigators if needed. Most significantly, Dr. Evelyn Carter had been recording the entire incident on a sophisticated device disguised as a simple smartwatch. As CEO of an airline company, she understood the legal and public relations implications of discrimination incidents, and she had come prepared to document anything that occurred during her undercover investigation. The digital footprint of Victoria Blackwood's racist meltdown was becoming massive and permanent. On social media, the incident was exploding across platforms. Flight 402 discrimination had been trending for 20 minutes and was being shared faster than platform algorithms could track. Dr. Evelyn Carter was trending globally as people searched for information about the airline's CEO who had been targeted. Victoria Blackwood was also trending, but for very different reasons, as social media users began sharing information about her background and calling for consequences. Tyler's livestream had been embedded on Reddit, where it was the top post on multiple subreddits, including Public Freakout, Justice Served, and Airline Stories. The Reddit comments were particularly brutal in their assessment of Victoria's behavior and their praise for Dr. Carter's composure. On Twitter, verified accounts with millions of followers were sharing clips of the incident with commentary ranging from outraged to satirical. Travel blogger with 4.2 million followers tweeted, "Imagine being so racist that you demand the owner of the airline remove herself from her own plane." Victoria Blackwood really thought her money made her untouchable. Karma is Real Civil Rights Law with 2.8 million followers posted, "This is textbook federal civil rights violation." Victoria Blackwood just committed crimes on camera while targeting one of the most successful black executives in America. The legal consequences will be severe. Justice Instagram stories were filled with screenshots from Tyler's livestream, often accompanied by fire emojis and outraged commentary. TikTok users were already creating reaction videos, with the most popular one beginning POV. "You're so entitled you try to have an airline CEO removed from her own plane." Major news organizations were beginning to pick up the story as their social media monitoring structures detected the trending hashtags. CNN's transportation correspondent had already reached out to Meridian Airways' press office for comment. The BBC's U.S. Bureau was preparing a segment on discrimination in air travel. Fox Business was readying a report on the incident's potential impact on airline stock prices. But the most significant documentation was happening in real time within corporate America itself. Meridian Airways' public relations team had been monitoring social media mentions of the company as part of their standard protocols. When Flight 402 discrimination began trending, automated alerts went out to senior executives, legal staff, and communications specialists. Within 15 minutes of Tyler's livestream going viral, Meridian's crisis management team was fully activated. Corporate attorneys were reviewing federal discrimination statutes. Human resources personnel were pulling employee records for everyone involved. The public relations department was drafting holding statements while waiting for more information. Most importantly, the incident was being monitored by Meridian's board of directors, who understood that their CEO was not just a target of discrimination, but was also conducting an undercover investigation that could have far-reaching implications for airline industry practices. Victoria Blackwood, still standing in the aisle of Flight 402 staring at Dr. Carter's credentials, had no idea that her behavior was being analyzed in corporate boardrooms, law schools, and social justice organizations around the world. She also had no idea that the consequences were already beginning. The first consequence came in the form of a phone call to the aircraft. Captain Rodriguez's radio crackled to life with a message from air traffic control that would change the trajectory of the entire incident. Horizon Air 402. Be advised that your departure has been delayed indefinitely, pending resolution of an onboard security incident. You are directed to return to the gate for passenger removal and federal investigation. Victoria heard the announcement and felt the first flutter of real panic. Security incident. What security incident? I haven't done anything wrong. Dr. Evelyn Carter looked at Victoria with an expression that might have been pity if it weren't so cold. Mrs. Blackwood making racist threats against passengers is a federal crime. Disrupting airline operations is a federal crime. Filing false accusations is a federal crime. You have committed multiple felonies while being recorded by dozens of people and broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers worldwide. Victoria's mouth opened and closed silently as the full scope of her situation began to penetrate her consciousness. She had been so focused on her outrage, so certain of her rightness, so convinced that her wealth and social status would protect her that she had never considered the possibility of actual consequences. But I didn't mean... Victoria stammered, looking around the cabin at the passengers who were still recording her. This is all just a misunderstanding. I was just trying to get comfortable in the seat I paid for. Tyler Brooks, still live streaming to an audience that had grown to over 200,000 viewers, provided commentary. She's trying to walk it back now, but we have everything on video. Every racist comment, every threat, every accusation. She called Dr. Carter a thief, demanded she be removed because of her race, and threatened to have the crew fired for protecting her from discrimination. The aircraft began moving back toward the gate, and Victoria could feel her carefully constructed world starting to crumble around her. But she still had no idea how completely her life was about to change. Because Dr. Evelyn Carter wasn't just planning to have Victoria removed from the flight. She was planning to make this incident a turning point for an entire industry. As Flight 402 approached the gate, Dr. Carter made a decision that would ensure Victoria Blackwood's racist meltdown became a case study in corporate accountability, social media justice, and the consequences of believing that wealth could protect someone from responsibility for their actions. The documentation phase was complete. The justice phase was about to begin. Flight 402 pulled back into Gate 47 with the mechanical precision of an aircraft whose crew had shifted from routine operations to crisis management. Through the small windows, passengers could see ground crew preparing for what was clearly going to be an unusual deplaning situation. News vans were already pulling into the airport perimeter, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like mechanical flowers reaching for the sun. Victoria Blackwood stood frozen in the aisle, still staring at Dr. Evelyn Carter's corporate credentials, as if hoping they would transform into something less threatening. But the gold-embossed portfolio remained exactly what it was, proof that she had just committed federal crimes against one of the most powerful executives in American aviation. Dr. Carter rose from her seat with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of Fortune 500 CEOs. At 61, she had the kind of presence that didn't require raised voices or dramatic gestures. Her authority was so inherent, so deeply embedded in decades of building an empire from nothing, that it seemed to change the very air pressure in the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Carter said, her voice carrying clearly to every passenger without any apparent effort, "I want to thank you for your patience during this incident. What you have witnessed today is precisely why I have been conducting undercover investigations of discrimination on our flights." Tyler Brooks's live stream audience had exploded past 250,000 viewers, and his chat was moving so fast that the individual messages appeared as a blur of outrage, support, and anticipation for what would happen next. "Captain Rodriguez." Dr. Carter continued, turning toward Marcus. Please contact airport security and request that they prepare to process a federal discrimination case. Mrs. Blackwood will need to be removed from this aircraft and detained for questioning about multiple civil rights violations." Marcus straightened his relief at finally being able to act according to company policy, mixing with his professional respect for the woman who had transformed his industry. "Yes, ma'am. Airport security is already en route, and I believe federal transportation authorities have been notified as well." Victoria found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "You can't do this. I'm a paying passenger. I have rights." Dr. Carter turned toward Victoria with the kind of measured gaze that had intimidated corporate lawyers and government regulators across 6 continents. "Mrs. Blackwood, you do indeed have rights. You have the right to remain silent, which I suggest you exercise immediately. You have the right to an attorney, which you will certainly need. And you had the right to travel on this aircraft with dignity and respect, which you forfeited the moment you decided to target another passenger based on their race." The clinical precision of Dr. Carter's words hit Victoria like physical blows. For the first time in her privileged life, she was facing someone who possessed more power than she did, someone who could not be intimidated by wealth or social connections, someone who would not be impressed by her threats or moved by her tears. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Victoria said, desperately grasping for the familiar comfort of hierarchy that had always protected her before. Dr. Carter's response was delivered with the kind of quiet devastation that only came from complete confidence. "Mrs. Blackwood, I don't have a supervisor. I founded this company 28 years ago when I was 33 years old, with a single cargo plane and a dream of building an airline that treated people with dignity. Today, Meridian Airways operates 847 aircraft, serves 312 destinations, and employs 127,000 people worldwide. We own controlling interests in 12 airlines, including the 67% stake in Horizon Air. That makes me the owner of this aircraft." Victoria's face had gone beyond pale into a grayish hue that suggested complete circulatory shock. The mathematical reality of her situation was beginning to penetrate her consciousness. She had targeted the founder and CEO of a $8.2 billion aviation empire. Furthermore, Dr. Carter continued our company's annual revenue exceeds $14 billion, which means that in the time it has taken for this incident to unfold, Meridian Airways has generated more income than you will see in several lifetimes. Your threats to damage our business or have our employees fired were not just racist and illegal, they were mathematically absurd. Tyler Brooks provided commentary for his live stream audience, his voice filled with awe. "Guys, she's not just revealing her identity, she's explaining exactly how powerless Victoria's threats actually were. This is the most sophisticated takedown I've ever witnessed." James Thompson had stopped recording and was simply watching in professional admiration. As someone who had built his own architecture firm from nothing, he recognized the kind of strategic thinking that Dr. Carter was displaying. This wasn't just about removing a disruptive passenger. This was about creating a teachable moment that would resonate throughout the transportation industry. Dr. Carter reached into her portfolio and pulled out a small device that looked like a sophisticated smartphone but was clearly something more advanced. "Mrs. Blackwood, during your 23-minute racist tirade, this device has been recording everything and transmitting it in real time to Meridian Airways' legal department, our public relations team, our board of directors, and our federal compliance office. Your threats, accusations, and discriminatory statements are now part of our corporate record and will be used in federal prosecution proceedings." Victoria's breathing became shallow and rapid. "Federal prosecution. For what? I didn't hurt anyone. I just wanted to sit comfortably in the seat I paid for." Dr. Carter's expression shifted to something that might have been educational patience if it weren't so terrifying. "Mrs. Blackwood, you committed multiple federal crimes. Under 49 U.S.C. 46,500. 4. You interfered with airline crew members in the performance of their duties. Under 18 U.S.C. 245, you intimidated a person based on their race while they were using public transportation. Under 18 U.S.C. 241, you conspired to deprive someone of their civil rights. Each of these charges carries potential prison sentences. The legal specificity of Dr. Carter's response revealed the depth of her preparation. This wasn't an emotional reaction or improvised response. This was the execution of a strategy that had been years in development. Sophia Martinez stood nearby, her professional admiration for her ultimate boss, mixing with satisfaction at seeing justice served. Throughout her 8 years as a flight attendant, she had witnessed countless incidents of passenger discrimination, most of which had gone unpunished because airlines prioritized customer satisfaction over employee dignity. Seeing Dr. Carter turn that dynamic completely upside down felt like vindication for every service worker who had ever been subjected to abuse. The aircraft door opened and airport security personnel began boarding. Leading them was Agent Diana Morrison from the FBI's Civil Rights Division, whose presence indicated that federal authorities were treating this as far more than a simple airline incident. Dr. Carter, Agent Morrison said with professional respect, "We've been monitoring the situation through social media and corporate channels. We're prepared to take Mrs. Blackwood into custody for federal civil rights violations." Victoria looked desperately around the cabin, seeking someone who might intervene on her behalf. But every passenger was looking at her with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. She had become a living example of how quickly privilege could transform into liability when it was used to harm others. "This is insane," Victoria said, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I'm being arrested for expressing preferences about where I want to sit. This is America. I have the right to choose my accommodations, doctor." Carter's final response was delivered with the kind of moral clarity that had guided her from sharecropper's daughter to aviation industry titan. "Mrs. Blackwood, you have never had the right to express racist preferences. You have never had the right to target people based on their appearance. You have never had the right to disrupt airline operations with discriminatory behavior. And you have never had the right to threaten people who refuse to participate in your racism." Agent Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs, and Victoria's carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement finally collapsed completely. "Victoria Blackwood, you are under arrest for federal civil rights violations. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights were read, Tyler Brooks provided final commentary to his live stream audience, which had grown to over 300,000 viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed what happens when entitlement meets accountability." Victoria Blackwood thought her money made her untouchable. She was wrong. The arrest was being broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of people worldwide, and within hours it would be viewed by millions more. Victoria Blackwood had achieved the kind of viral fame that destroys lives rather than building them. But for Dr. Evelyn Carter, this was just the beginning. The real transformation was about to begin. The footage of Victoria Blackwood being led off Flight 402 in handcuffs reached 1 million views within 40 minutes of being uploaded. By the time she was processed at the federal detention facility in Queens, Victoria Blackwood was trending globally, and her racist meltdown had become the top story on every major news network. Dr. Evelyn Carter remained on the aircraft as passengers deplaned, using the time to conduct interviews with investigators, coordinate with her corporate legal team, and begin implementing the wide-ranging changes that would ensure incidents like this became impossible in the future. Agent Morrison. Dr. Carter said as she provided her formal statement, "I want to make it clear that this incident represents a failure of our industry's accountability structures. Mrs. Blackwood felt comfortable expressing racist views on our aircraft because she believed her wealth would protect her from consequences. That belief was not formed in a vacuum. It was reinforced by years of airlines prioritizing customer satisfaction over employee dignity and passenger equality. Agent Morrison nodded, understanding that Dr. Carter was thinking far beyond the immediate case. "What changes do you envision implementing comprehensive reform?" Dr. Carter replied. "Starting immediately, Meridian Airways will implement zero-tolerance policies for discriminatory behavior by passengers. Any customer who targets our employees or fellow passengers based on race, ethnicity, religion, gender, or any other protected characteristic will be permanently banned from all Meridian properties and prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law." The implications of Dr. Carter's statement rippled through the aviation industry within hours. As the CEO of one of the world's largest airline companies, her policy decisions would influence industry standards across the globe. Tyler Brooks's live stream had evolved into a cultural phenomenon. Media outlets were requesting permission to use his footage, legal analysts were dissecting the civil rights implications of the case, and social justice organizations were hailing the incident as a turning point in corporate accountability. "What we witnessed today," Tyler explained to his now 400,000 concurrent viewers, "wasn't just individual racism. It was institutional racism being challenged by someone with the power to change entire organizational structures." Dr. Carter didn't just defend herself. She used this moment to transform an industry. The social media response was unprecedented. Dr. Evelyn Carter had generated over 2.3 million mentions across platforms, with users sharing her biography, her company's diversity initiatives, and her journey from sharecropper's daughter to aviation pioneer. Corporate executives, politicians, and celebrities were posting messages of support and calling for other industries to follow Meridian Airways' lead. Senator Smith posted, "Dr. Evelyn Carter's response to racial discrimination shows what real leadership looks like. Every CEO should study this case. Accountability matters." Oprah tweeted, "When dignity meets power, transformation follows." Dr. Carter turned a moment of hate into an opportunity for justice. This is how change happens. Elon Musk wrote impressive crisis management and strategic thinking. Dr. Carter built an empire and used it to create positive change. Respect. But the immediate consequences extended far beyond social media praise. Within 6 hours of Victoria's arrest, Meridian Airways' stock price had jumped 12% as investors responded positively to the company's decisive handling of discrimination. Travel industry analysts were calling it the Carter effect, predicting that other airlines would rush to implement similar zero-tolerance policies to avoid being seen as less progressive than Meridian. Victoria Blackwood's consequences were far more severe. Her arrest had triggered automatic background checks that revealed troubling patterns of discriminatory behavior spanning years. The charity organizations she had worked with began releasing statements distancing themselves from her involvement. The Children's Future Foundation announced that her invitation to the London Gala had been revoked and that her previous donations would be returned. More damaging was the financial investigation that federal authorities launched as part of their civil rights case. Victoria's lavish lifestyle had always seemed slightly incongruous with her deceased husband's known business earnings, and investigators were discovering why. Robert Blackwood's real estate empire, it turned out, had been built on a foundation of discriminatory lending practices, housing segregation, and tax avoidance schemes that were only now being fully understood. Victoria had inherited not just wealth, but liability for decades of federal violations that were only now coming to light. The Manhattan penthouse was seized by federal marshals as evidence in a racketeering investigation. The Hamptons estate was frozen pending resolution of discrimination lawsuits filed by former employees. The art collection was impounded as potentially purchased with proceeds from illegal activities. Within 72 hours, Victoria Blackwood had gone from wealthy socialite to federal defendant facing potential decades in prison and complete financial ruin. Captain Marcus Rodriguez and Sofia Martinez were experiencing very different consequences. Dr. Carter personally commended their professionalism during the crisis, and within a week, both had received promotions that reflected Meridian Airways' commitment to supporting employees who upheld company values. Marcus was named Director of Flight Operations for Meridian's East Coast hub, with responsibility for training other pilots in anti-discrimination protocols. Sophia was promoted to lead flight attendant with additional duties developing customer service training that emphasized passenger dignity over customer satisfaction. What happened on Flight 402? Sophia told the industry publication Aviation Weekly proved that our company's values aren't just words in an employee handbook. When we stood up for what was right, we were supported and rewarded. That's the kind of leadership that changes industries. Dr. Carter used the global attention to announce a $50 million initiative called the Dignity in Transit Program, which would fund anti-discrimination training across the transportation industry, provide legal support for employees who reported bias incidents, and create scholarship programs for underrepresented students pursuing aviation careers. The transportation sector employs millions of people who deserve to work with dignity and serve customers who treat them with respect. Dr. Carter announced at a press conference that was broadcast live to over 20 million viewers. Mrs. Blackwood's behavior was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of institutional tolerance for discrimination that we will no longer accept. The press conference also revealed the scope of Dr. Carter's undercover investigation. Over 3 months, she had documented 47 separate incidents of passenger discrimination across various airlines, creating the most comprehensive database of transportation-related bias ever assembled. These incidents were not random, Dr. Carter explained. They followed patterns that suggested institutional problems rather than individual bad actors. Some flights had become magnets for discriminatory behavior because airlines had failed to create consequences for passengers who targeted others based on race, ethnicity, or appearance. The revelation that one of America's most powerful CEOs had been conducting undercover discrimination investigations sent shockwaves through corporate America. Other executives began questioning whether their own companies were adequately addressing bias issues, and several announced similar investigations of their organizational cultures. Victoria Blackwood's arrest became a symbol of accountability that resonated far beyond the aviation industry. Business schools began teaching case studies about the incident, emphasizing how quickly privilege could become liability when used to harm others. Legal experts cited the case as evidence that civil rights law enforcement was entering a new era of corporate accountability. The transformation Dr. Carter envisioned was already beginning, but the long-term changes she had set in motion would prove even more significant than the immediate consequences of Victoria's racist meltdown. Flight 402 finally departed for London 12 hours behind schedule, but with a passenger manifest that had been permanently altered. Victoria Blackwood's seat remained empty not just for this flight, but for every Meridian Airways flight for the rest of her life. Dr. Carter sat in seat 1. A, reading her worn paperback surrounded by passengers who understood they had witnessed something historic. The quiet woman in the navy cardigan had revealed the power of dignity, defended consequences delivered, and justice served at 35,000 feet. The aviation industry would never be the same. 6 months after Victoria Blackwood's arrest, the transformation of the airline industry was complete and irreversible. What had begun as a racist passenger's meltdown on Flight 402 had evolved into the most comprehensive reform of transportation equality in American history. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood before the International Aviation Safety and Security Conference in Geneva, addressing an audience of airline executives, government regulators, and civil rights leaders from 67 countries. Her presentation was titled, "The Carter Protocol: Creating Accountability Structures for Transportation Equality." The incident on Flight 402 revealed institutional failures that extended far beyond one passenger's discriminatory behavior. Dr. Carter explained to the assembled delegates, It exposed an industry culture that prioritized customer satisfaction over human dignity, that treated discrimination as a customer service issue rather than a civil rights violation. The Carter Protocol had become the global standard for aviation industry discrimination prevention. Every major airline had implemented zero-tolerance policies for passenger bias incidents, created real-time reporting structures for crew members, and established permanent bans for travelers who targeted others based on protected characteristics. The Federal Aviation Administration had adopted the Carter Protocol as mandatory federal regulation, making anti-discrimination training a requirement for all airline personnel. The European Union had implemented similar standards across all 27 member nations. Airlines that failed to comply faced immediate suspension of operating licenses. But the changes extended far beyond policy implementation. The entire culture of air travel had shifted toward an assumption of dignity for all passengers and respect for airline employees. Captain Marcus Rodriguez had become the face of the industry's transformation. As Director of Flight Operations for Meridian's expanded East Coast operations, he oversaw training programs that had been adopted by airlines worldwide. His story of moral courage during the Flight 402 incident had made him a sought-after speaker at aviation conferences and business leadership seminars. What I learned that day, Marcus told audiences, is that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. When I saw Dr. Carter being targeted with racist abuse, I had to choose between temporary comfort and permanent integrity. I chose integrity, and it changed my career and my life. Sophia Martinez had transformed from flight attendant to international advocate for service worker dignity. Her promotion to Director of Passenger Experience had led to her creating training programs used by hospitality companies, restaurants, and retail organizations worldwide. Her TED Talk, When Service Meets Justice, had been viewed over 15 million times. For too long, service workers were expected to absorb abuse as part of the job, Sophia explained in interviews. Dr. Carter showed us that companies can be profitable while protecting employee dignity. The Flight 402 incident proved that treating workers with respect creates better businesses and happier customers. Tyler Brooks had parlayed his viral live stream into a career as a social justice documentarian. His streaming platform had grown to 8.7 million subscribers, and his coverage of discrimination incidents had led to policy changes at dozens of corporations. The Tyler Brooks Foundation provided legal support for service workers facing customer abuse and funded diversity training programs for small businesses. That live stream changed my life, Tyler reflected during a documentary about the Flight 402 incident. But more importantly, it changed how millions of people think about racism, privilege, and accountability. When you see someone with Dr. Carter's grace and dignity facing Victoria's hatred, you understand what real strength looks like. Victoria Blackwood's story had taken a very different trajectory. Federal prosecutors had used her racist tirade as the foundation for a sweeping investigation into discriminatory practices in real estate, hospitality, and financial services. Her husband's business empire was revealed to have been built on decades of housing discrimination, predatory lending, and tax fraud. Victoria was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, with additional charges pending in related financial crimes cases. Her assets were liquidated to pay restitution to victims of discriminatory practices. The Manhattan penthouse was converted into affordable housing. The Hamptons estate became a civil rights education center. But perhaps most significantly, Victoria's public rehabilitation had become a case study in how privilege could be transformed into purpose. During her incarceration, she began working with civil rights organizations to understand the impact of her behavior and the organizational structures that had enabled it. I spent my entire adult life believing that money made me better than other people, Victoria said during a video interview from federal prison that was viewed by over 30 million people. Dr. Carter showed me that wealth without character is just decoration on emptiness. I lost everything, but I finally learned what dignity actually means. Dr. Evelyn Carter had used the global attention from the Flight 402 incident to expand Meridian Airways into the world's largest airline company. The company's commitment to equality had attracted top talent, loyal customers, and enthusiastic investors. Meridian's stock price had tripled in the 6 months since Victoria's arrest, proving that moral leadership created business value. But Dr. Carter's most significant achievement was the Dignity in Transit program, which had grown into a $200 million initiative that was transforming transportation industries worldwide. The program funded anti-discrimination training, legal support for bias victims, and scholarship programs that had increased diversity in aviation careers by 340%. The goal was never to punish Mrs. Blackwood, Dr. Carter explained in her Geneva presentation. The goal was to create accountability structures that would prevent future Victoria Blackwoods from believing their wealth entitled them to dehumanize others. The cultural impact of the Flight 402 incident had extended far beyond transportation. Business schools taught case studies about the importance of moral leadership in crisis situations. Law schools used the incident to illustrate how civil rights enforcement could drive organizational change. Social psychology researchers studied how viral documentation of racism could create accountability for discriminatory behavior. As Dr. Carter concluded her Geneva presentation, she returned to the fundamental principle that had guided her response to Victoria's racism. Dignity is not an upgrade. It is the standard. Every person, regardless of their appearance, background, or economic status, deserves to be treated with respect. When we create accountability structures that protect that principle, we build organizations that serve everyone better. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 7 minutes, 1 minute for each hour that Flight 402 had been delayed while justice was served. Dr. Evelyn Carter returned to her seat in the conference hall surrounded by transportation leaders who understood that the quiet woman in the navy cardigan had permanently changed their industry. She opened a worn paperback book and began reading just as she had been doing when Victoria Blackwood first demanded her removal from seat 1A. But this time she was reading in a world where such demands had become unthinkable, where accountability had replaced tolerance for discrimination, and where dignity had become the non-negotiable standard for human interaction. The transformation was complete. Flight 402 had become a symbol of justice served, consequences delivered, and the power of quiet strength to change everything. And in airports around the world, passengers of every race, nationality, and background boarded aircraft knowing they would be treated with the dignity that Dr. Evelyn Carter had fought to protect. One seat, one flight, one moment of moral courage at a time. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions happen quietly. Sometimes justice arrives not with protests or legislation, but with a simple refusal to accept that wealth justifies racism, or that privilege excuses hatred. Dr. Evelyn Carter had proven that when dignity meets power, transformation follows, and that transformation once begun becomes unstoppable. If this story moved you, remember that dignity isn't negotiable and respect isn't optional. When we witness discrimination, we have a choice: stay silent or speak up. Dr. Carter chose to transform a moment of hatred into an opportunity for justice, proving that one person's courage can change an entire industry. Have you ever witnessed discrimination? Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of how you look? Share your story in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation about dignity, respect, and the power we all have to create change. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their race, background, or appearance. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of justice served and accountability delivered. And share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Because when we stand together against discrimination, when we refuse to let hatred win, when we choose courage over comfort, we create a world where everyone can fly with dignity. Thank you for watching. And remember, your voice matters. Your actions count, and together, we can make sure that what happened to Victoria Blackwood happens to anyone who thinks their money gives them the right to dehumanize others. Until next time, keep flying high, keep standing up for what's right, and never forget that sometimes the quietest voice in the room has the power to change everything.